Chapter 28. The Ironmaster. Sir Leicester Dedlock has got the better, for the time being, of the family gout, and is once more, in a literal no less than in a figurative point of view, upon his legs. He is at his place in Lincolnshire, but the waters are out again on the low-lying grounds, and the cold and the damp steal into Chesney Wold. Though well defended, and eke into Sir Leicester's bones, the blazing fires of faggot and coal, Dedlock timber, and antediluvian forest, that blaze upon the broad wide hearths, and wink in the twilight on the frowning woods, sullen to see how trees are sacrificed, do not exclude the enemy. The hot water pipes that trail themselves all over the house, the cushioned doors and windows, and the screens and curtains fail to supply the fire's deficiencies, and to satisfy Sir Leicester's need. Hence the fashionable intelligence proclaims one morning to the listening earth that Lady Dedlock is expected shortly to return to town for a few weeks. It is a melancholy truth that even great men have their poor relations. Indeed, great men have often more than their fair share of poor relations, inasmuch as very red blood of superior quality, like inferior blood unlawfully shed, will cry out, and will be heard. Sir Leicester's cousins in the remotest degree are so many murderers in the respect that they will out, among whom there are cousins who are so poor that one might almost dare to think it would have been the happier for them never to have been plated links upon the Dedlock chain of gold, but to have been made of common iron at first, and done base service. Service, however, with a few limited reservations, genteel but not profitable, they may not do, being of the Dedlock dignity, so they visit their richer cousins, and get into debt when they can, and live but shabbily when they can't, and find the women no husbands and the men no wives, and ride in borrowed carriages, and sit at feasts that are never of their own making, and so go through high life. The rich family sum has been divided by so many figures, and they are the something over that nobody knows what to do with. Everybody on Sir Leicester Dedlock's side of the question, and of his way of thinking, would appear to be his cousin more or less, from my Lord Boodle through to the Duke of Foodle down to Noodle. Sir Leicester, like a glorious spider, stretches his threads of relationship, but while he is stately in the cousinship of the everybodies, he is a kind and generous man, according to his dignified way, in the cousinship of the nobodies, and at the present time, in despite of the damp, he stays out of the visit of several such cousins at Chesney Wold with the constancy of a martyr. Of these, most foremost in the front rank stands Volumnia Dedlock, a young lady of 60, who is doubly highly related, having the honour to be a poor relation by the mother's side to another great family. Miss Volumnia, displaying in early life a pretty talent for cutting ornaments out of coloured paper, and also for singing to the guitar in the Spanish tongue, and propounding French conundrums in country houses, passed the 20 years of her existence between 20 and 40 in a sufficiently agreeable manner. Lapsing then out of date, and being considered too bored by mankind by her vocal performances in the Spanish language, she retired to Bath, where she lives slenderly on an annual present from Sir Leicester, and whence she makes occasional resurrections in the country houses of her cousins. She has an extensive acquaintance at Bath among appalling old gentlemen with thin legs and nankeen trousers, and is of high standing in that dreary city, but she is a little dreaded elsewhere in consequence of an indiscreet profusion in the article of rouge and persistency, and an obsolete pearl necklace like a rosary of little birds' eggs. In any country in a wholesome state, Volumnia would be clear case for the pension list. Efforts have been made to get her on it, and when William Buffy came in, it was fully expected that her name would be put down for a couple of hundred a year. But William Buffy somehow discovered, contrary to all expectation, that these were not the times when it could be done, and this was the first clear indication Sir Leicester Dedlock had conveyed to him that the country was going to pieces. There is likewise the Honourable Bob Staples, who can make warm mashes with the skill of a veterinary surgeon, and is a better shot than most gamekeepers. He has been for some time particularly desirous to serve his country in a post of good emoluments, unaccompanied by any trouble or responsibility, in a well-regulated body politic. This natural desire on the part of a spirited young gentleman so highly connected would be speedily recognised. But somehow William Buffy found, when he came in, that these were not times in which he could manage that little matter either. And this was the second indication Celesta Dedlock had conveyed to him that the country was going to pieces. The rest of the cousins are ladies and gentlemen of various ages and capacities, the major part amiable and sensible, and likely to have done half well enough in life if they could have overcome their cousinship. As it is, they are almost all a little worsted by it, and lounge in purposelessness and listless paths, and seem to be quite as much at a loss how to dispose of themselves as anybody else can be of how to dispose of them. In this society, and where not, my Lady Dedlock reigns supreme, beautiful, elegant, accomplished, and powerful in her little world, for the world of fashion does not stretch all the way from pole to pole. Her influence in Celesta's house, however haughty and indifferent her manner, is greatly to improve it and refine it. Cousins, even those older cousins who were paralysed when Celesta married her, to do her feudal homage, and the Honourable Bob Staples daily repeats to some chosen person between breakfast and lunch his favourite original remark, that she is the best groomed woman in the whole stud. Such the guests in the long drawing-room at Chesney Wold this dismal night, when the step upon the Ghost's Walk, inaudible here, however, might be the step of a deceased cousin shut out in the cold. It is near bedtime. Bedroom fires blaze brightly all over the house, raising ghosts of grim furniture on wall and ceiling. Bedroom candlesticks bristle on the distant table by the door, and cousins yawn on ottomans, cousins at the piano, cousins at the soda-water tray, cousins rising from the card-table, cousins gathered round the fire. Standing on one side of his own peculiar fire, for there are two, Celesta on the opposite side of the broad hearth, my lady at her table, Volumnia, as one of the more privileged cousins, in a luxurious chair between them. Celesta glancing with magnificent displeasure at the rouge and the pearl necklace. "I occasionally meet on my staircase here," drawls Volumnia, whose thoughts perhaps are already hopping it up to bed, after a long evening of very desultory talk, "one of the prettiest girls, I think, that I ever saw in my life." "A protégée of my lady's," observes Celesta. "I thought so. I felt sure that some uncommon eye must have picked that girl out. She really is a marvel." "A dolly sort of beauty, perhaps," says Miss Volumnia, preserving her own thought, "but in its way perfect. Such a bloom I never saw." Celesta, with his magnificent glance of displeasure at the rouge, appears to say so too. "Indeed," remarks my lady languidly, "if there is any uncommon eye in the case, it is Mrs. Rouncewell's and not mine. Rotha is her discovery." "Your maid, I suppose?" "No, my anything. Pet, secretary, messenger, I don't know what. You like to have her about you as you would like to have a flower, or a bird, or a picture, or a poodle. No, not a poodle, though, or anything else that was equally pretty," says Volumnia, sympathizing. "Yes, how charming now, and how well that delightful old soul Mrs. Rouncewell is looking. She must be an immense age, and yet she is as active and handsome. She is the dearest friend I have, positively." Celesta feels it to be right and fitting that the housekeeper of Chesney Wold should be a remarkable person. Apart from that, he has a real regard for Mrs. Rouncewell, and likes to hear her praised. So he says, "You are right, Volumnia," which Volumnia is extremely glad to hear. "She has no daughter of her own, has she?" "Mrs. Rouncewell? No, Volumnia, she has a son. Indeed, she had two." My lady, whose chronic malady of boredom has been sadly aggravated by Volumnia this evening, glances wearily towards the candlesticks and heaves a noiseless sigh. And it is a remarkable example of the confusion into which the present age has fallen, of the obliteration of landmarks, the opening of floodgates, and the uprooting of distinctions, says Sir Leicester with stately gloom, that I have been informed by Mr. Tulkinghorn that Mrs. Rouncewell's son has been invited to go into Parliament. Miss Volumnia utters a little sharp scream. Yes, indeed, repeats Sir Leicester, into Parliament. I never heard of such a thing. Good gracious, what is the man? Exclaims Volumnia. He is called, I believe, an ironmaster. Sir Leicester says it slowly, and with that gravity and doubt, as not being sure but that he is called a lead mistress, or that the right word may be some other word expressive of some other relationship to some other metal. Volumnia utters another little scream. He has declined the proposal. If my information from Mr. Tulkinghorn be correct, as I have no doubt it is, Mr. Tulkinghorn being always correct and exact, still that does not lessen the anomaly which is fraught with strange considerations, startling considerations, as it appears to me. Miss Volumnia, rising with a look of candlestick wards, Sir Leicester politely performs the grand tour of the drawing-room, brings one, and lights it at my lady's shaded lamp. I must beg you, my lady, he says while doing so, to remain a few moments, for this individual of whom I speak arrived this evening shortly before dinner, and requested in a very becoming note Sir Leicester, with his habitual regard to truth, dwells upon it, I am bound to say in a very becoming and well expressed note, the favour of a short interview with yourself and myself on the subject of this young girl. As it appeared that he wished to depart to-night, I replied that we would see him before retiring. Miss Volumnia, with a third little scream, takes flight, wishing her hosts, oh lud, well rid of the, ironmaster. The other cousins soon disperse, to the last cousin there. Sir Leicester rings the bell. Make my compliments to Mr. Rouncewell in the housekeeper's apartments, and say I can receive him now. My lady, who has heard all of this with slight attention outwardly, looks towards Mr. Rouncewell as he comes in. He is a little over 50, perhaps, of a good figure, like his mother. He has a clear voice, a broad forehead from which his dark hair has retired, and a shrewd enough open face. He is a responsible-looking gentleman, dressed in black, portly enough, but strong and active, has a perfect natural and easy air, and is not the least embarrassed by the great presence into which he comes. Sir Leicester and Lady Dedlock, as I have already apologized for intruding on you, I cannot do better than be very brief. I thank you, Sir Leicester. The head of the Dedlocks has motioned towards a sofa between himself and my lady. Mr. Rouncewell quietly takes his seat there. In these busy times, when so many great undertakings are in progress, people like myself have so many workmen in so many places that we are always on the flight. Sir Leicester is content enough that the ironmaster should feel that there is no hurry there. There, in that ancient house, rooted in that quiet park, where the ivy and the moss have had time to mature, and the gnarled and warted elms and the umbrageous oaks stand deep in the fern and leaves of 100 years, and where the sundial on the terrace has dumbly recorded for centuries that time which was as much the property of every Dedlock, while he lasted, as the house and lands. Sir Leicester sits down in an easy chair, opposing his repose and that of Chesney Wold to the restless flights of ironmasters. Lady Dedlock has been so kind, proceeds Mr. Rouncewell with respectful glance and a bow that way, as to place near her a young beauty of the name of Rosa. Now my son has fallen in love with Rosa, and has asked my consent to his proposing marriage to her, and to their becoming engaged, if she will take him, which I suppose she will. I have never seen Rosa until to-day, but I have some confidence in my son's good sense, even in love. I find her what he represents her, to the best of my judgment, and my mother speaks of her with great commendation. She in all respects deserves it, says my lady. I am happy, Lady Dedlock, that you say so, and I need not comment on the value to me of your kind opinion of her. That, observes Sir Leicester with unspeakable grandeur, for he thinks the ironmaster a little too glib, must be quite unnecessary. Quite unnecessary, Sir Leicester. Now my son is a very young man, and Rosa is a very young woman. As I made my way, so my son must make his, and his being married at present is out of the question. But supposing I gave my consent to his engaging himself to this pretty girl, if this pretty girl will engage herself to him, I think it a piece of candour to say at once, I am sure, Sir Leicester and Lady Dedlock, you will understand and excuse me, I should make it a condition that she did not remain at Chesney Wold. Therefore, before communicating further with my son, I take the liberty of saying that if her removal would be in any way inconvenient or objectionable, I will hold the matter over with him for any reasonable time and leave it precisely where it is. Not remain at Chesney Wold? Make it a condition? All Sir Leicester's old misgivings relative to Wat Tyler and the people in the iron districts who do nothing but turn out by torchlight come in a shower upon his head, the fine grey hair of which, as well as his whiskers, actually stirs with indignation. Am I to understand, sir, says Sir Leicester, and is my lady to understand, he brings her in thus specially, as first as a point of gallantry, and next as a point of prudence, having great reliance on her sense, am I to understand, Mr. Rouncewell, and is my lady to understand, sir, that you consider this young woman too good for Chesney Wold, or likely to be injured by remaining here? Certainly not, Sir Leicester. I am glad to hear it, Sir Leicester. Very lofty indeed. Pray, Mr. Rouncewell, says my lady, warning Sir Leicester off with the slightest gesture of her pretty hand, as if he were a fly, explain to me what you mean. Willingly, Lady Dedlock. There is nothing I could desire more. Addressing her composed face, whose intelligence, however, is too quick and active to be concealed by any studied impassiveness, however habitual, to the strong Saxon face of the visitor, a picture of resolution and perseverance, my lady listens with attention, occasionally slightly bending her head. I am the son of your housekeeper, Lady Dedlock, and I passed my childhood about this house. My mother has lived here half a century, and will die here, I have no doubt. She is one of those examples, perhaps as good as one as there is, of love and attachment and fidelity in such a nation, which England may well be proud of, but of which no order can appropriate the whole pride or the whole merit, because such an instance bespeaks of high worth on two sides, on the great side assuredly, on the small one no less assuredly. Sir Leicester snorts a little to hear the Lord laid down in this way, but in his honour of his love and truth he freely, though silently, admits the justice of the ironmaster's proposition. Pardon me for saying what is so obvious, but I wouldn't have it hastily supposed, with the least turn of his eyes towards Sir Leicester, that I am ashamed of my mother's position here, or wanting in all just respect for Chesney Wold and the family. I certainly have desired, Lady Dedlock, that my mother should retire after so many years and end her days with me. But as I have found out that to sever this strong bond would be to break her heart, I have long abandoned that idea. Sir Leicester, very magnificent again at the notion of Mrs. Rouncewell being spirited off from her natural home to end her days with an ironmaster. I have been, proceeds the visitor in a modest, clear way, an apprentice and a workman. I have lived on workman's wages years and years, and beyond a certain point I have had to educate myself. My wife was a foreman's daughter, and plainly brought up. I have 3 daughters besides this son of whom I have spoken, and being fortunately able to give them greater advantage than we have had ourselves, we have educated them well, very well. It has been one of our great cares and pleasures to make them worthy of any station. A little boastfulness in his fatherly tone here, as if he added in his heart, even of the Chesney Wold station. Not a little more magnificence, therefore, on the part of Sir Leicester. All this is so frequent, Lady Dedlock, where I live and among the class to which I belong, that what would be generally called unequal marriages are not of such rare occurrence with us as elsewhere. A son will sometimes make it known to his father that he has fallen in love, say, with a young woman in the factory. The father, who once worked in the factory himself, will be a little disappointed at first. Very possibly it may be that he had other views for his son. However, the chances are that, having ascertained the young woman to be of unblemished character, he will say to his son, I must be quite sure that you are in earnest here. This is a serious matter for both of you. Therefore I shall have this girl educated for 2 years, or it may be I shall place this girl at the same school with your sisters for such a time, during which you will give me your word and honour to see her only so often. If at the expiration date of that time, when she has so far profited by her advantages as that you may be upon a fair equality, You are both in the same mind. I will do my part to make you happy. I know of several cases such as I describe, my lady, and I think they indicate to me my own course now." Sir Leicester's magnificence explodes, calmly but terribly. "Mr. Rouncewell," says Sir Leicester, with his right hand at the breast of his blue coat, the attitude of state in which he is painted in the gallery, "do you draw a parallel between Chesney Wold and here he resists a disposition to choke, a factory?" "I need not reply, Sir Leicester, that the two places are very different, but for the purposes of this case I think a parallel may be justly drawn between them." Sir Leicester directs his majestic glance down one side of the long drawing room and up the other before he can believe that he is awake. "Are you aware, sir, that this young woman to whom my lady has placed near her person was brought up at the village school outside the gates?" "Sir Leicester, I am quite aware of it." "A very good school it is, and handsomely supported by this family." "Then, Mr. Rouncewell," returns Sir Leicester, "the application of what you have said to me is incomprehensible." "Will it be more comprehensible, Sir Leicester, if I say the ironmaster is reddening a little that I do not regard the village school as teaching everything desirable to be known by my son's wife? From the village school of Chesney Wold, intact as it is this minute, from the whole framework of society to the aforesaid framework receiving tremendous cracks in consequence of people, ironmasters, lead mistresses, and what not minding their catechism and getting out of the station under which they were called, necessarily and forever, according to Sir Leicester's rapid logic, the first station in which they happen to find themselves, and from that to their educating other people out of their stations, and so obliterating the landmarks and opening the floodgates and all the rest of it, this is the swift progress of the deadlock mind." "My lady, I beg your pardon. Permit me for one moment." She has given a faint indication of intending to speak. "Mr. Rouncewell, our views of duty, and all our views of station, and our views of education, and our views of, in short, all our views, are so diametrically opposed that to prolong this discussion must be repellent to your feelings and repellent to my own. This young woman is honoured with my lady's notice and favour. If she wishes to withdraw herself from that notice and favour, or if she chooses to place herself under the influence of any one who may, in his peculiar opinions, you will allow me to say, in his peculiar opinions, though I readily admit that he is not accountable for them to me, who may, in his peculiar opinions, withdraw her from that notice and favour, she is at any time at liberty to do so. We are obliged to you for the plainness with which you have spoken. It will have no effect of itself one way or another on the young woman's position here. Beyond this we can make no terms, and here we beg, if you will be so good, to leave the subject." The visitor pauses a moment to give my lady an opportunity, but she says nothing. He then rises and replies, "Sir Leicester and Lady Dedlock, allow me to thank you for your attention, and only to observe that I shall very seriously recommend my son to conquer his present inclinations. Good night." "Mr. Rouncewell," says Sir Leicester, with all the nature of a gentleman shining in him, "it is late, and the roads are dark. I hope your time is not so precious that they will allow my lady and myself to offer you the hospitality of Chesney Wold for to-night at least." "I hope so," adds my lady. "I am much obliged to you, but I have to travel all night in order to reach a distant part of the country punctually at an appointed time in the morning." Therewith the ironmaster takes his departure, Sir Leicester ringing the bell and my lady rising as he leaves the room. When my lady goes to her boudoir, she sits down thoughtfully by the fire, and, inattentive to the ghost's walk, looks at Rosa writing in an inner room. Presently my lady calls her. "Come to me, my child. Tell me the truth. Are you in love?" "Oh, my lady," looking at the downcast and blushing face, says, smiling, "who is it? Is it Mrs. Rouncewell's grandson?" "If you please, my lady, but I don't know that I'm in love with him yet." "Yet, you silly little thing! Do you know that he loves you yet?" "I think he likes me a little, my lady," and Rosa bursts into tears. Is this Lady Dedlock standing beside the village beauty, smoothing her dark hair with that motherly touch, and watching her with eyes so full of musing interest? Ah, indeed it is. Listen to me, my child. You are young and true, and I believe you're attached to me. Indeed I am, my lady. Indeed there's nothing in the world I wouldn't do to show how much. I don't think you would wish to leave me just yet, Rosa, even for a lover." "No, my lady. Oh, no." Rosa looks up for the first time, quite frightened at the thought. "Confide in me, my child. Don't fear me. I wish you to be happy, and I will make you so, if I can make anybody happy on this earth." Rosa, with fresh tears, kneels at her feet and kisses her hand. My lady takes the hand with which she has caught it, and, standing with her eyes fixed on the fire, puts it about between her own two hands and gradually lets it fall. Seeing her so absorbed, Rosa softly withdraws, but still my lady's eyes are on the fire. In search of what? Of any hand that is no more? Of any hand that never was? Of any touch that might have magically changed her life? Or does she listen to the ghost's walk, and think what step does it most resemble? A man's? A woman's? The pattering of a little child's feet, ever coming on, on. Some melancholy influence is upon her. Or why should so proud a lady close the doors and sit alone upon the hearth so desolate? Volumnia is away the next day, and all the cousins are scattered before dinner. Not a cousin of the batch is but amazed to hear from Sir Leicester at breakfast time of the obliteration of landmarks, and the opening of floodgates, and the cracking of the framework of society, manifested through Mr. Rouncewell's son. Not a cousin of the batch but is really indignant, and connects it with the feebleness of William Buffy when in office, and really does feel deprived of a stake in the country, or the pension list, or something by fraud and wrong. As to Volumnia, she is handed down the great staircase by Sir Leicester, as eloquent upon the theme as if there were a general rising in the north of England to obtain her rouge pot and pearl necklace, and thus with a clatter of maids and valets. For it is one appurtenance of their cousinship that, however difficult they may find it to keep themselves, they must keep maids and valets. The cousins disperse to the four winds of heaven, and the one wintry wind that blows today shakes a shower from the trees near the deserted house, as if all the cousins had been changed into leaves. Chapter 29. The Young Man. Chesney Wold is shut up. Carpets are rolled into great scrolls in corners of comfortless rooms. Bright damask does penance in brown Holland. Carving and gilding puts on mortification, and the Dedlock ancestors retire from the light of day again. Around and around the house the leaves fall thick, but never fast, for they come circling down with dead lightness that is sombre and slow. Let the gardener sweep and sweep the turf as he will, and press the leaves into barrows and wheel them off, still they lie ankle deep. Howls the shrill wind around Chesney Wold. The sharp rain beats, the windows rattle, and the chimneys growl. Mists hide in the avenues, veil the points of view, and move in funeral wise across the rising grounds. On all the house there is a cold blank smell, like the smell of a little church, though something drier, suggesting that the dead and buried Dedlocks walk there in the long nights and leave the flavour of their graves behind them. But the house in town, which is rarely in the same mind as Chesney Wold at the same time, seldom rejoicing when it rejoices or mourning when it mourns, except when a Dedlock dies, the house in town shines out awakened, as warm and bright as so much state may be, as delicately redolent of the ticking of the clocks and the crisp burning of fires alone disturb the stillness in the rooms, and Sir Leicester is glad to repose in dignified contentment before the great fire in the library, condescendingly perusing the backs of his books, in honouring the fine arts with a glance of approbation. For he has his pictures, ancient and modern, some of the fancy ball school, in which art occasionally condescends to become a master, which would be best catalogued, like the miscellaneous articles in a sale, as 3 high-backed chairs, a table and cover, long-necked bottle containing wine, 1 flask, 1 Spanish female's costume, 3/4 face portrait of Miss Jogg the model, and a suit of armour containing Don Quixote, or 1 stone terrace, cracked, 1 gondola in distance, 1 Venetian senator's dress complete, richly embroidered white satin costume, with profile portrait of Miss Jogg the model, one scimitar superbly mounted in gold with jewelled handle, elaborate Moorish dress, very rare, and Othello. Mr. Tulkinghorn comes and goes pretty often, there being estate business to do, leases to be renewed, and so on. He sees my lady pretty often too, and he and she are as composed and as indifferent, and take as little heed of one another as ever. Yet it may be that my lady fears this Mr. Tulkinghorn, and that he knows it. It may be that he pursues her doggedly and steadily, with no touch of compunction, remorse, or pity. It may be that her beauty, and all the state and brilliancy surrounding her, only gives him the greater zest for what he has set upon, and makes him the more inflexible in it. Whether he be cold and cruel, whether immovable in what he has made his duty, whether absorbed in love of power, whether determined to have nothing hidden from him in ground where he has burrowed among secrets all his life, whether he in his heart despises the splendour of which he is the distant beam, whether he is always treasuring up slights and offences in the affability of his gorgeous clients, whether he be any of this or all of this, it may be that my lady had better have 5,000 pairs of fashionable eyes upon her in distrustful vigilance than the 2 eyes of this rusty lawyer with his wisp of neckcloth and his dull black breeches tied with ribbons at the knees. Sir Leicester sits in my lady's room, that room in which Mr. Tulkinghorn read the affidavit in Jarndyce and Jarndyce, particularly complacent. My lady, as on that day, sits before the fire with her screen in her hand. Sir Leicester is particularly complacent because he has found in his newspaper some congenial remarks bearing directly on the floodgates and framework of society. They apply so happily to the late case that Sir Leicester has come from the library to my lady's room expressly to read them aloud. The man who wrote this article, he observes by way of preface, nodding at the fire as if he were nodding it down at the man from a mount, has a well-balanced mind. This man's mind is not so well balanced that he bores my lady, who, after a languid effort to listen, or rather a languid resignation of herself to show of listening, becomes distraught and falls into a contemplation of the fire as if it were her fire at Chesney Wold, and she had never left it. Sir Leicester, quite unconscious, reads on through his double eyeglass, occasionally stopping to remove his glass and express his approval as very true indeed, very properly put. I have frequently made the same remark myself, invariably losing his place after each observation and going up and down the column to find it again. Sir Leicester is reading with infinite gravity and state when the door opens, and the Mercury in powder makes this strange announcement: "The young man, my lady, of the name of Guppy." Sir Leicester pauses, stares, repeats in a killing voice, "The young man of the name of Guppy." Looking round, he beholds the young man of the name of Guppy, much discomfited, and not presenting a very impressive letter of introduction in his manner and appearance. "Pray," says Sir Leicester to the Mercury, "what do you mean announcing with this abruptness a young man of the name of Guppy?" "I beg your pardon, Sir Leicester, but my lady said she would see the young man whenever he called. I was not aware that you were here, Sir Leicester." With this apology, the Mercury directs a scornful and indignant look at the young man of the name of Guppy, which plainly says, "What do you come calling here for, and getting me in a row?" "It's quite right. I gave him those directions," says my lady. "Let the young man wait." "By no means, my lady. Since he has your orders to come, I will not interrupt you." Sir Leicester, in his gallantry, retires, rather declining to accept a bow from the young man as he goes out, and majestically supposing him to be some shoemaker of intrusive appearance. Lady Dedlock looks imperiously at her visitor when the servant left the room, casting her eyes over him from head to foot. She suffers him to stand by the door and asks him what he wants. "Your ladyship would have the kindness to oblige me with a little conversation," returns Mr. Guppy, embarrassed. "You are, of course, the person who has written me so many letters?" "Several, your ladyship. Several before your ladyship condescended to favour me with an answer. Could you not take the same means of rendering a conversation unnecessary? Can you not still?" Mr. Guppy screws his mouth into a silent no and shakes his head. You have been strangely importunate. It would appear, after all, what you have to say does not concern me, and I don't know how it can, and I don't expect that it will. You will allow me to cut you short with but a little ceremony. Say what you have to say, if you please. My lady, with a careless toss of a screen, turns herself towards the fire again, sitting almost with her back to the young man, name of Guppy. With your ladyship's permission, then, says the young man, I will now enter on to my business. I am, as I told your ladyship in my first letter, in the law. Being in the law, I have learnt the habit of not committing myself in writing, and therefore I did not mention to your ladyship the name of the firm with which I am connected, and at which my standing, and I may add income, is tolerably good. I may now state to your ladyship in confidence the name of that firm is Kenyon Carboy of Lincoln's Inn, which may not be altogether unknown to your ladyship in connection with a case of Chancery, Jarndyce and Jarndyce. My lady's figure begins to be expressive of some attention. She has ceased to toss the screen, and holds it as if she were listening. Now I may say to your ladyship at once, says Mr. Guppy, a little emboldened, it's no matter arising out of Jarndyce and Jarndyce that makes me so desirous to speak to your ladyship, which conduct I have no doubt did appear and does appear obtrusive, in fact almost blackguardly. After waiting for a moment to receive some assurance to the contrary, and not receiving any, Mr. Guppy proceeds. If it had been Jarndyce and Jarndyce, I should have gone at once to your ladyship's solicitor, Mr. Tulkinghorn and the Fields. I have the pleasure of being acquainted with Mr. Tulkinghorn, or at least we move when we meet each other. And if it had been any business of that sort, I should have gone to him. My lady turns round a little and says, you had better sit down. Thank you, your ladyship. Mr. Guppy does so. Now, your ladyship, Mr. Guppy refers to a little slip of paper on which he has made small notes of his line of argument, and which seems to involve him in the densest obscurity whenever he looks at it. Yes, I place myself entirely in your ladyship's hands. If your ladyship was to make any complaint to Kenyon Carboy or to Mr. Tulkinghorn of the present visit, I should be placed in a very disagreeable situation. That I openly admit. Consequently, I rely upon your ladyship's honour. My lady, with a disdainful gesture of the hand that holds the screen, assures him of his being worth no complaint from her. Thank you, your ladyship, says Mr. Guppy. Quite satisfactory. Now, dash it. The fact is, I put down a head or two here of the order of the points I thought of touching upon, and they're written short, and I can't quite make out what they mean. If your ladyship will excuse me taking it to the window half a moment. Mr. Guppy, going to the window, tumbles into a pair of lovebirds, to whom he says in his confusion, I beg your pardon, I'm sure. This does not tend to the greater legibility of his notes. He murmurs, growing warm and red, holding the slip of paper, now close to his eyes, now a long way off, of C.S. What's C.S. for? Oh, C.S. Oh, I know. Yes, to be sure, and comes back enlightened. I am not aware, says Mr. Guppy, standing midway between my lady and this chair, whether your ladyship ever happened to hear or to see a young lady of the name of Miss Esther Summerson. My lady looks at him full. I saw a young lady of that name not long ago, this past autumn. Now, did it strike your ladyship that she was like anybody? Says Mr. Guppy, crossing his arms, holding his head on one side, and scratching the corner of his mouth with his memoranda. My lady removes her eyes from him no more. No? Not like your ladyship's family? No? I think your ladyship, says Mr. Guppy, can hardly remember Miss Summerson's face. I remember the young lady very well. What has this to do with me? Your ladyship, I do assure you that having Miss Summerson's image imprinted on my heart, which I mention in confidence, I found, when I had the honour of going over to your ladyship's mansion in Chesney Wold, while on a short out in the country of Lincolnshire with a friend, such resemblance between Miss Esther Summerson and your ladyship's own portrait that it completely knocked me over. So much that I didn't at the moment even know what it was that knocked me over. And now I have the honour of beholding your ladyship near. I have often since that taken the liberty of looking at your ladyship in your carriage in the park, when I dare say you was not aware of me, but I never saw your ladyship so near. It's really more surprising than I thought it. The young man of the name of Guppy, there had been times when ladies lived in strongholds and had unscrupulous attendants within call, when that poor life of yours would not have been worth a minute's purchase, with those beautiful eyes looking at you as they look at this moment. My lady, slowly using her little hand screen as a fan, asks him again what he supposes that his taste for likeness has to do with her. Your ladyship, replies Mr. Guppy, referring to his paper. I'm coming to that. Dash these notes. Oh, Mrs. Chadband. Ah, yes. Mr. Guppy draws his chair a little forward and seats himself again. My lady reclines in her chair composedly, though with a trifle less of graceful ease than usual perhaps, and never falters in her steady gaze. Stop a minute, Mr. Guppy refers again. Yes, twice. Yes, I see my way now. Right on. Rolling up the slip of paper as an instrument to point his speech with, Mr. Guppy proceeds. Your ladyship, there is a mystery about Miss Esther Summerson's birth, and bringing it up, I am informed of that fact because, which I mention in confidence, I know it in the way of my profession at Kenge & Carboy's. Now, as I've already mentioned to your ladyship, Miss Summerson's image has been printed on my art. If I could clear this mystery for her, or prove her to be well related, or find that, having the honour to be a remote branch of your ladyship's family, she has a right to be made a party in Jarndyce and Jarndyce, why, I might make a sort of claim upon Miss Summerson to look with an eye of more dedicated favour on my proposals than she has exactly done as yet. In fact, as yet she hasn't favoured them at all. A kind of angry smile dawns upon my lady's face. That's a very singular circumstance, your ladyship, says Mr. Guppy. Though one of those circumstances that do fall in the way of us professional men, which I may call myself. For though not admitted, yet I have had a present of my articles made to me by Kenge & Carboy, on my mother's advancing from the principal of her little income the money for the stamp, which comes heavy, that I have encountered the person who lived as a servant with the lady who brought Miss Summerson up, before Mr. Jarndyce took charge of her. That lady was a Miss Barbary, your ladyship. Is the dead colour on my lady's face reflected from the screen, which is a green silk ground, which she holds in her raised hand, as if she had forgotten it, or is it a dreadful paleness that has fallen on her? Did your ladyship, says Mr. Guppy, ever happen to hear of Miss Barbary? I don't know. I think so, yes. Was Miss Barbary at all connected with your ladyship's family? My lady's lips move, but they utter nothing. She shakes her head. Not connected, says Mr. Guppy. Oh, not to your ladyship's knowledge, perhaps. Ah, but might be, yes. After each of these interrogatories, she has inclined her head. Very good. Now, this Miss Barbary was extremely close. Seems to have been extraordinarily close for a female. Females being generally, in common life at least, rather given to conversation. And my witness never had an idea whether she possessed a single relative. On one occasion, and only one, she seems to have been confidential to my witness on a single point. And then she told her that the little girl's real name was not Esther Summerson, but Esther Horden. My God! Mr. Guppy stares. Lady Dedlock sits before him, looking through him, with the same dark shade upon her face, in the same attitude even to the holding of the screen, with her lips a little apart, her brow a little contracted, but for the moment dead. He sees her consciousness return, sees a tremor pass across her frame like a ripple over water, sees her lips shake, sees her compose them by a great effort, sees her force herself back to the knowledge of his presence and of what he has said. All this so quickly that her exclamation and her dead condition seem to have passed away like the features of those long-preserved dead bodies, sometimes opened up in tombs, which, struck by the air like lightning, vanish in a breath. Your ladyship is acquainted with the name of Horden? I have heard it before. Name of any collateral or remote branch of your ladyship's family? No. Now, your ladyship, says Mr. Guppy, I come to the last point of the case, so far as I've got it up. It's going on. I shall gather it up closer and closer as it goes on. Your ladyship must know, if your ladyship don't happen by any chance to know already, that there was found dead at the house of a person named Crook near Chancery Lane, some time ago, a law writer in great distress, upon which law writer there was an inquest, and which law writer was an anonymous character, his name being unknown. But, your ladyship, I have discovered very lately that that law writer's name was Horden." "And what is that to me?" "Ah, your ladyship, that's the question. Now, your ladyship, a queer thing happened after that man's death. A lady started up, a disguised lady, your ladyship, who went to look at the scene of action and went to look at his grave. She hired a crossing sweeping boy to show it her. If your ladyship would wish to have the boy produced in corroboration of this statement, I can lay my hand upon him at any time. The wretched boy is nothing to my lady, and she does not wish to have him produced." "Oh, I assure your ladyship it's a very queer start indeed," says Mr. Guppy. "If you was to hear him tell about the rings that sparkled on her fingers when she took her glove off, you'd think it quite romantic. There are diamonds glittering on the hand that holds the screen. My lady trifles with the screen and makes them glitter more, again with that expression which in other times might have been so dangerous to the young man of the name of Guppy. It was supposed, your ladyship, that he left no rag or scrap behind him by which he could be possibly identified, but he did. He left a bundle of old letters. The screen goes as before. All this time her eyes never once release him. They were taken and secreted, and tomorrow night, your ladyship, they will come into my possession. Still, I ask you, what is this to me?" "Your ladyship, I conclude with that." Mr. Guppy rises. "If you think there's enough in this chain of circumstance put together, if the undoubted strong likeness of this young lady to your ladyship, which is a positive fact for a jury, in her having been brought up by Miss Barbary, in Miss Barbary stating Miss Summerson's real name to be Horden, in your ladyship's knowing both of these names very well, and in Horden's dying as he did, to give your ladyship a family interest in going further into the case, I will bring these papers here. I don't know what they are, except that they are old letters. I have never had them in my possession yet. I will bring those papers here as soon as I get them, and go over them for the first time with your ladyship. I have told your ladyship my object. I have told your ladyship that I should be placed in a very disagreeable situation if any complaint was made, and all is in strict confidence. Is this the full purpose of the young man of the name of Guppy, or has he any other? Do his words disclose the length, breadth, depth of his object and suspicion in coming here, or if not, what do they hide? He is a match for my lady there. She may look at him, but he could look at the table and keep that witness box face of his from telling anything. You may bring the letters, says my lady, if you choose. Your ladyship's not very encouraging, upon my word and honour, says Mr. Guppy, a little injured. You may bring the letters, she repeats in the same tone, if you please. It shall be done. I wish your ladyship good day. On a table near her is a rich bauble of a casket, barred and clasped like an old strong chest. She, looking at him, takes it to her and unlocks it. "Oh, I assure your ladyship I'm not actuated by any motives of that sort," says Mr. Guppy, "and I couldn't accept anything of the kind. I wish your ladyship good day, and I'm much obliged to you all the same." So the young man makes his bow and goes downstairs, where the supercilious Mercury does not consider himself called upon to leave his Olympus by the hall fire to let the young man out. As Sir Leicester basks in his library, dozes over his newspaper, there is no influence in the house to startle him, nor to say to make very trees at Chesney Wold fling up their knotted arms, the very portraits frown, the very armour stir. No, words, sobs, and cries about air, and air is so shut in and shut out throughout the house in town that sounds need to be uttered trumpet-tongued. Indeed, my lady in her chamber to carry any faint vibration to Sir Leicester's ears, and yet this cry in the house going upward from a wild figure on its knees. Oh, my child, not dead in the first hours of her life, as my cruel sister told me, but sternly nurtured by her, after she had renounced me and my name. Oh, my child, oh, my child!